Shalom in Yeshua's name. I'm Dr. Jenkins Sahayam. I welcome you to my Bible teaching series. This topic is entitled The Messiah. Since this topic requires a vast understanding of the scripture to join the various puzzle in the right place, I have split this topic into various parts so as to have a comprehensive understanding of this topic. As my teaching are sequential, if this is the first topic of mine you are listening to, I highly recommend you to listen to my earlier teaching, namely the name of God and the nature of God, before you listen to this teaching. Shalom in Yeshua's name. This is Dr. Jenkins Sahayam. You are now watching part 4 of the Messiah series entitled Law and the Covenant. Before getting into this topic, let us have a quick recap of what we have covered so far. God created man in his own image. God gave man dominion over all things. Death was never man's destiny, as long as he is obedient to God's warning of not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But Satan tricked Adam and Eve to eat out of that forbidden tree. Thus, the dominion of man is forfeited to Satan, who is the ruler of sin. God, however, because of his grace and mercy, clothes the nakedness of sin through a garment of skin which indicated a blood sacrifice. From then on, God accepted only blood sacrifice. God, however, promised that through the offspring of a woman, that is a human being, the dominion will be restored back to man in the future. The mark of God points to the grace and mercy of God through a sacrifice that is provided to the righteous and wicked alike. God's plan to restore man's dominion by the seed of the woman was, however, tested as a result of mating between angels and human women, which resulted in a hybrid race called the Nephilim, who were giants. But God responded by destroying the whole earth through a global flood, but saved Noah and his family along with a specific pairs of living creatures by protecting them in an ark. Though the Nephilim race were destroyed, some of their genetic evil survived, probably through the wives of Noah's sons. Mankind had only one language prior to their rebellion at the Tower of Babel, where they intended to build a tower reaching to the sky so as to escape a future flood in case of their rebellion. And man's rebellion against God thus continued, that made God to confuse their language and assign them to other angelic beings and create borders. Yahweh, however, chose a people who are yet to be a nation who would in future understand this divine language and inherit the land he sovereignly chose for himself. Yahweh accordingly chose Abraham, a descendant of Noah's son Shem, to make a covenant with him to carry out his promise of restoring man's dominion through the seed of the woman. Yahweh revealed to Abraham his statutes, judgments, commandments, and law, which is a requirement for the successful restoration of man's dominion by being holy, thus sinless, and thereby escape from being held captive to death by Satan as a result of sin, which is transgression of God's law. Yahweh then blessed Abraham and promised him to make him into a great nation through the promised seed, whereby all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Though Abraham had other children, Yahweh chose to establish his covenant through his descendants Isaac and Jacob. Isaac being the promised son of Abraham's legal wife Sarah, and Jacob, though being the second son, got the birthright from his elder brother Esau, who has sold his birthright in fear of his death due to hunger, and thereby not having the faith in God's covenantal promise that is to be inherited by him as a firstborn. This is in complete contrast with Abraham, whom Yahweh asked to offer the covenantal promised son Isaac as a burnt offering, through whom he had earlier promised to bring the promised seed. Abraham's faith act was rewarded by God because he believed even if the promised son was sacrificed, Yahweh would somehow fulfill his covenant which he promised to accomplish through Isaac by resurrecting him. Yahweh gave Abraham the circumcision as the sign of the covenant. Yahweh appeared to Abraham as a man. Jacob wrestled with the man and recognized him later as God. The man blessed Jacob, saying that he will be henceforth called Israel. Yahweh now chose Jacob's descendants, that is Israel, as a nation to establish his covenant from which the promised seed is to come. Yahweh gives Israel his law, which they are to follow in order to be a holy and priestly nation for the whole world. Yahweh outlines the requirement needed for him to dwell among his people, which the people were to make. This is called a sanctuary. Aaron was consecrated to be a prototype Messiah as a priest whose purpose is to mediate between God and man and also bear the sins of the people symbolically. Yahweh fulfills the initial promise to Abraham of giving to his descendants the promised land of Canaan, which he sovereignly chose. Yahweh declares Israel to be his firstborn. Yahweh gave them the command to kill a Passover lamb and apply its blood to the doorpost of the Israelite house, which would serve as a sign to protect the firstborn of the family from the angel of death. Yahweh said, he has given blood upon the altar to make atonement for the souls. Yahweh said, he is a merciful and gracious God, abounding in goodness and truth, bearing iniquity, transgression, and sin, but by no means clearing the guilty. Yahweh stood in front of a rock and asked Moses to strike the rock, which yielded water. Yahweh asked the people bitten by the fiery serpents to look at a brazen serpent upon a stake in faith, which he commanded Moses to make in order to be healed. All people who left Egypt towards Canaan, who witnessed all the supernatural miracles of God, yet didn't believe him but transgressed his commands, Yahweh swore not to bring them into the promised land. This included, unfortunately, even Moses and Aaron. Only Joshua and Caleb made into the promised land among the original generation, along with a newer generation of people who were born in the wilderness. So, coming to the day's topic, law and covenant. So, what is a covenant and what is a law? Biblically, a covenant is an agreement between two parties which is made by cutting a living animal and shedding its blood. This sacrificial meal is then eaten by both the parties to bind themselves to honor their commitment made to each other by any means. The significance is that the fate of the sacrificial animal would happen to the offender of the covenant by the one who was offended. The covenant is bound by terms and conditions that is called as the law or Torah, which is found as instructions in the first five books of the Bible, namely Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Yahweh's covenant with Israel as a nation at Mount Sinai was likened to a wedding covenant in the scripture. Some of the important terms and condition Israel is to have is that in Deuteronomy 6:4 we read, "Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." Here, the Hebrew word for one, as in Yahweh is one, is the word Yechad, which also indicates a compound unity. Yahweh then reveals why he chose Israel. "For you are a people to Yahweh your God. Yahweh your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples of the face of the earth. Yahweh did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you were more in number than any other people, for you were the least of all peoples, but because Yahweh loves you and because he would keep an oath which he swore to your fathers. Yahweh has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." So Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which Yahweh commanded him. Then all the people answered together and said, "All that Yahweh has spoken, we will do." So Moses brought back the words of the people to Yahweh. This we see in Exodus 19. So also in Exodus 24, we read, "Moses came and told the people all the words of Yahweh and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, 'All the words which Yahweh has said, we will do.' And Moses wrote all the words of Yahweh, and he rose early in the morning, built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered the burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to Yahweh. And Moses took half the blood and put it in the basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read in the hearing of the people. And they said, 'All that Yahweh has said we will do and be obedient.' And Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you according to all the words." So the altar here served as a symbolic of Yahweh on the one hand, and the people of Israel on the other hand, coming into a covenant with a blood sacrifice, the significance of which we saw earlier, the terms and conditions of which were recorded in the book of the covenant. So the bottom line is this: now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. You shall be holy, for I, Yahweh your God, am holy. To which the Israelites responded, "All that Yahweh has spoken, we will do." And Moses returned the words of the people unto Yahweh, and they sealed the blood covenant. Now, Yahweh gives the pattern of the Ark of the Covenant, which would house the Ten Commandments tablet, the manna which rained from heaven, and the Aaronic rod to be kept in the most holy place of the sanctuary, which he would command the people of Israel to build for him to dwell according to the pattern he has showed them. Exodus 25. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them according to all that I show you. That is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishing, just so you shall make it. Again in Exodus 29, we read, I will dwell among the children of Israel and will be their God, and they shall know that I am Yahweh their God, who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, and I may dwell among them. I am Yahweh their God. And I will dwell among the children of Israel, and will not forsake my people Israel. I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. And this is the pattern of the sanctuary which Yahweh commanded the Israelites to build so that he could dwell among the people of Israel. As we saw earlier, Yahweh's covenant with Israel was likened to that of a marriage covenant. For your Maker is your husband, Yahweh of hosts is his name, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. He is called the God of the whole earth. This we see in Isaiah 54, and in Jeremiah 3 we read, Return, O backsliding children, says Yahweh, for I am married to you. I will take you one from a city and two from a family, and I will bring you to Zion. Hosea chapter 2. And it shall be in that day, says Yahweh, that you will call me my husband, and no longer call me my master. But Yahweh's commitment to dwell with his people had a problem. While God is holy, the people were not. It is for this reason it required a Mashiach or an anointed one to mediate between God and his people. And Yahweh asked Moses to anoint Aaron with an anointing oil to consecrate him for this service. Exodus 28. So it shall be on Aaron's forehead that Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things which the children of Israel hallow in all their holy gifts, and it shall always be on his forehead, and they may be accepted before Yahweh. So Aaron had to symbolically bear the iniquity of the holy things which the children of Israel hallow in all their holy gifts. But this is only a mere shadow of something after which it is patterned. And in Exodus 34, we read Yahweh revealing about himself to Moses as follows. And Yahweh passed before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh God, merciful and gracious, long suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. It is very important to note here that the word forgiving is translated from the Hebrew word nasa, which means to bear. It's the same Hebrew word that is used in the previous instance as well, that Aaron would bear the iniquity concerning the holy gifts. In part 1, we already saw Yahweh doing a priestly role of covering the nakedness of Adam and Eve after their fall with garments of skin indicative of a blood sacrifice. He also promised that through a seed of the woman, the dominion of man will be restored back. It's very important to note that on account of the uncleanness of the people, blood atonement had to be made for the altar as well as the mercy seat. We read this in Leviticus 16. And he shall go out to the altar that is before Yahweh and make atonement for it, and shall take some of the blood of the bull and some of the blood of the goat and put it on the horns of the altar all around. Then he shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his fingers 7 times, cleanse it, and consecrate it from the uncleanness of the children of Israel. So it shall make atonement for the holy place as well, because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel and because of their transgressions for all their sins. And so he shall do for the tabernacle of meeting, which remains among them in the midst of their uncleanness. So, even the very sanctuary which Yahweh promised to dwell had to be atoned with blood on account of the uncleanness of the people because of their sins. So, in order to approach a holy God, the people were to come with a sacrifice, which is a blood sacrifice, that is to be mediated by a consecrated priest to the holy God. Now we will see what this sacrifice signifies. The word sacrifice is translated from the Hebrew word korban. The word sacrifice implies that the person bringing it must deprive himself of something he cares about. But an offering is something which implies a payment, fee, or tax. So, what is the purpose of sacrifices? It provides people the right way of relationship with God. It served to introspect the need for an innocent being to shed its blood to atone for the sins of a sinner. It serves as a memorial for the promised sacrifice by Yahweh to Abraham. It serves as a memorial of Yahweh's provided blood atonement at the altar he spoke about to the people of Israel. It serves as a memorial for the mark of God that offered divine protection. And the most important thing is that these sacrifices have to be brought to the place where God chose to place his name. The different types of sacrifices are the burnt offering, the meal offering, peace offering, sin offering, and trespass or guilt offering. As we see already, these sacrifices are meant to deny ourselves before our holy God. The symbolic nature of these blood sacrifice is better understood by the meaning they have in the original Hebrew. For example, the word translated bowels or gut is from the Hebrew word me'ah, which also means intuition, like how we also use in English that I have a gut feeling. The word stomach is translated from the Hebrew word chai, which also means life, as in the Hebrew thought Food in the stomach is essential for life. And the word arm is translated from the Hebrew word zeroah, which also means power, as we use arm power in English. The word heart is translated from the Hebrew word lev, which also means mind, just like how we use in English that I have a heart feel. The word for kidney is translated from the Hebrew word kilea, which also means emotion. The word liver is translated from the Hebrew word kaved, which also means weighty or glory. And the word womb is translated from the Hebrew word rachem, which also means mercy or compassion. And the word breath is translated from the Hebrew word ruah, which also means character. And the word nose is translated from the Hebrew word af, which also means anger, as evidenced by the flaring of nostrils during anger. Collectively, all these things are identified as the nephesh or the soul. So, when you offer a sacrifice having all these portions, you actually mean denying your intuition, life, power, mind, emotion, and glory before God. So, when such a sacrifice is consumed by fire at the altar, the soothing aroma that the scripture says God smells indicates that it serves as comforting his anger. But what we need to keep in mind is that all these various types of sacrifices are only for unintentional sins and not for intentional sins. This is the reason we read in 1 Samuel chapter 15. As Yahweh has great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of Yahweh, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. In Hosea again we read, for I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. In Jeremiah, we read it again. For I did not speak to your fathers or command them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning the burnt offerings or sacrifices. But this is what I commanded them, saying, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people, and walk in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well with you. Yet they did not obey or incline their ear, but followed the counsels and dictates of their evil hearts, and went backward and not forward. Again, Micah 6 we read, with what shall I come before Yahweh, and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will Yahweh be pleased with the thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? So all these verses clearly warns us not to take sacrifices lightly and insists the importance of obedience to the commandments of God, which are the terms and conditions of the covenant. After this, we find what Yahweh commanded the Israelites to do when they come into Canaan. Deuteronomy 7. When Yahweh your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you, and when Yahweh your God delivers them over you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter for your son. for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of Yahweh will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. But thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars and break down their sacred pillars and cut down their wooden images and burn their carved images with fire. If you could recollect from part 2, these are the people who were carrying the genetic evil of the Nephilims. And it is in fact the promise Yahweh had earlier given to Abraham. In Genesis 15, we read, Then Yahweh said to Abraham, Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. But in the fourth generation they shall return here. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So after waiting patiently for 400 years, Yahweh finally thought it's time for him to judge the Canaanites because their iniquities have attained a full measure. We read this in Leviticus 18. The abominations of the Canaanites were mainly sexual perversion, the sexual activity involving one's father, mother, sister, daughter, daughter-in-law, brother, son, son-in-law, neighbors, stepsisters, stepbrothers, same-sex, bestiality, and going after strange flesh. Yahweh warns the Israelites against this. Do not defile yourself with any of these things, for by all these things the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nation or any stranger who dwells among you. For all these abominations the men of the land have done who were before you, and thus the land is defiled, lest the land vomit you out also when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the person who has committed them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am Yahweh your God. And also in Deuteronomy 18, we find the other reasons why the Canaanites were driven out. In Deuteronomy 18 we read, When you come into the land which Yahweh your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or anyone who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to Yahweh. And because of these abominations, Yahweh your God drives them out from before you. You shall be blameless before Yahweh your God. For these nations which you will dispossess listen to soothsayers and diviners. But as for you, Yahweh your God has not appointed such for you. Yahweh also told the Israelites, Do not think in your heart after Yahweh your God has cast them out before you, saying, Because of my righteousness Yahweh has brought me into this land. But it is because of the wickedness of the nations that Yahweh is driving them out from before you. It is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations that Yahweh your God drives them out from before you, and that he may fulfill the word which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Therefore understand that Yahweh your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff necked people. Therefore, do not defile the land which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell. For I, Yahweh, dwell among the children of Israel. Yahweh also made it clear in Leviticus 25. We read, "The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me, and in all the land of your possession you shall grant redemption of the land. You shall walk in all the ways which Yahweh your God has commanded you, that you may live and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess." While giving all these commandments in Deuteronomy 4:2 and 12:32, we read that Yahweh warning the Israelites that you shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your God, which I command you. And in various places like Exodus 12:19, 12:38, 12:49, Leviticus 19:34, 24:22, and in Numbers 9:14, 15:15, and in Isaiah 42:6 and 63, we read that the same law applies for both the native Israelite as well as the Gentile who is grafted into Israel. Not only that, in various places like Exodus 20:6, Deuteronomy 5:10, 7:9, 11:13, 11:22, 30:16, 6:5, and Leviticus 19:18, we find the obedience to the commandments of God is equivalent to loving God Himself. Yahweh also says that the purpose of these commandments is for Israel to be the light for the other Gentile nations. In Deuteronomy 4, we read, "Surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as Yahweh my God commanded me, that you should act according to them in the land which you go to possess. Therefore, be careful to observe them, for this is your wisdom and understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has God so near to it, as Yahweh our God is to us? For whatever reason we may call upon him, and what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you this day." We also read in Deuteronomy 11 and Deuteronomy 30 that the blessings and curses of God are related to the obedience of the people to his commandments. "Behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of Yahweh your God, which I command you today, and the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of Yahweh your God, but turn aside from the way which I command you today to go after other gods which you have not known." So, with relation to the land they are going to possess, Yahweh told them he would bless them if they were to be obedient to his commandments. The blessings are: the land will be fertile with adequate rains in its season, hence surplus of food. The enemies will be eliminated and there would be peace in the land. Increased in health and in the number of population. The confirmation of the covenant, and God himself would make his dwelling among them and walk with them. But if they do not obey God's commandments, Yahweh warns them of his curses. The curses are terror and oppression by enemies who will rule over you, pestilences and wasting diseases, No rains, hence drought and famine. The cities will be desolated. The punishment will increase sevenfold to their transgressions. But in case if they persistently transgress, then the punishment will increase another sevenfold times. And finally, they will be scattered to other nations. So far, we have covered a general outline about the law and the covenant. Now we shall focus on some of the specific laws so as to understand the context of the metaphors pertaining to messianic prophecies. So the basic law is built on two tablets, which is loving God, as we see in Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And the other one is loving thy neighbor. In Leviticus 19:18, we read, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh." Upon these two platforms are the two tablets of the Ten Commandments. The first four commandments are about loving God, and the last six of the Ten Commandments are about loving fellow human being. And all these Ten Commandments are just a headline, the expansion of which is detailed in the rest of the five books of Moses, namely Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, coming to the specific laws. In scripture, we read Yahweh to be a jealous God, which is taken from the Hebrew word Elkanah. In Exodus 34:14, we read, "For you shall worship no other God, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God." Yahweh further warns the Israelites not to intermarry with the sons and daughters of the inhabitants of the Canaanites, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they play the harlot with their gods and make sacrifice to their gods, and one of them invites you, and you eat of his sacrifice, and you take of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters play the harlot with their gods, and make your sons play the harlot with their gods. So the important thing to note here is that Yahweh equates the worshipping of other gods and eating the food sacrificed to the other gods to harlotry. With this in mind, let's now find out what the term jealous means scripturally. Numbers 5. If the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife, although she has not defiled herself, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest. He shall bring the offering required for her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley meal. He shall pour no oil on it and put no frankincense on it, because it is a grain offering of jealousy, an offering for remembering, for bringing iniquity into remembrance. And the priest shall bring her near and set her before Yahweh. The priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle and put it into the water. Then the priest shall stand the woman before Yahweh, uncover the woman's head, and put the offering for remembering in her hands, which is the grain offering of jealousy. And the priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that brings a curse. And the priest shall put her under an oath and say to the woman, "If no man has lain with you, and if you have not gone astray to uncleanness while under your husband's authority, be free from this bitter water that brings a curse. But if you have gone astray while under your husband's authority, and if you have defiled yourself, and some man other than your husband has lain with you, then the priest shall put the woman under the oath of the curse, and he shall say to the woman, Yahweh make you a curse and an oath among your people. When Yahweh makes your thigh rot and your belly swell, and may this water that causes the curse go into your stomach and make your belly swell and your thigh rot. Then the woman shall say, Amen, so be it. Then the priest shall write these curses in a book, and he shall scrape them off into the bitter water, and he shall make the woman drink the bitter water that brings a curse. And the water that brings the curse shall enter her to become bitter. Then the priest shall take the grain offering of jealousy from the woman's hand, shall wave the offering before Yahweh, and bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take a handful of the offering as its memorial portion, burn it on the altar, and afterward make the woman drink the water. When he has made her drink the water, then it shall be, if she has defiled herself and behaved unfaithfully toward her husband, that the water that brings a curse will enter her and become bitter, and her belly will swell, her thigh will rot, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she shall be free and may conceive children. This is the law of jealousy, when a wife, while under her husband's authority, goes astray and defiles herself, or when the spirit of jealousy comes upon a man and he becomes jealous of his wife, then he shall stand the woman before Yahweh, and the priest shall execute all this law upon her. Then the man shall be free from iniquity, but the woman shall bear her guilt. So, this is a very important law to keep in mind. Yahweh says he is a jealous God, meaning he who takes his covenant with Israel as a marriage covenant. So, if the people were to forsake Yahweh and worship other gods, it is equal to someone playing harlotry. So, the consequence is that when Yahweh judges his people out of his jealousy, which is within his right of being a husband as per their marriage covenant at Sinai, if anyone who has not followed him or his laws are liable to drink from the bitter cup of curse. The next law is the law of divorce. Deuteronomy 24. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. When she has departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband deters her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as his wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before Yahweh, and you shall not bring sin on the land which Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance. So, according to Yahweh, once if a person divorces his wife and she goes out and marry another person, and if her latter husband divorces her, or if he died, the former husband should never take that woman back as her wife after she has been defiled. The next law is the law of slavery. We read it in Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15. Now, these are the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the seventh he shall go out free and pay nothing. So, this law speaks about the duration of the Hebrew servant to serve his master. Hebrew servant is anyone who is under the covenant of Yahweh. He would serve for 6 years and had to be released on the seventh year without extracting any payment for his freedom. The next law is the law of the kinsman redeemer. This we read in Leviticus 25. Now, if a sojourner or stranger close to you becomes rich, and one of your brethren who dwells by him becomes poor, and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner close to you, or to a member of the stranger's family, after he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or among who is near of kin to him in his family may redeem him, or if he is able, he may redeem himself. Thus he shall reckon with him who brought him. The price of his release shall be according to the number of years from the year that he was sold to him until the year of Jubilee. It shall be according to the time of a hired servant for him. If there are still many years remaining, according to them he shall repay the price of his redemption from the money with which he was bought. And if there remain but a few years until the year of Jubilee, when he shall reckon with him, and according to his years shall he repay him the price of his redemption. He shall be with him as a yearly hired servant, and he shall not rule with rigor over him in your sight. And if he is not redeemed in these years, then he shall be released in the year of Jubilee, he and his children with him. For the children of Israel are servants to me, they my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. So the bottom line is that if a Hebrew is sold to a sojourner or stranger, one who is among his kinsmen can redeem that Hebrew servant by making a payment in order to secure his release. So the qualities of a kinsman redeemer is that he must be a kinsman, he must be a freeman, he must be able to pay the price, and he must be willing to pay the price. The next law is the law of blood guilt. In Numbers chapter 35, we read, "So you shall not pollute the land where you are, for blood defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land, for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. Therefore, do not defile the land which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell, and for I, Yahweh, dwell among the children of Israel." In verse 25, we read about the law concerning accidental killing without any malicious intent. So the congregation shall deliver such a manslayer from the hand of the avenger of blood, and the congregation shall return him to the city of refuge where he had fled, and he shall remain there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer shall return to the land of his possession. The next law is the law concerning sowing and reaping. Leviticus 19. When you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count their fruit as uncircumcised. 3 years it shall be as uncircumcised to you. It shall not be eaten. But in the fourth year all its fruits shall be holy, a praise to Yahweh. And in the fifth year you may eat its fruit, that it may yield to you its increase. I am Yahweh your God. And another law concerning sowing and reaping we read in Leviticus 25. Yahweh spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to Yahweh. For 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. But in the seventh year it shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to Yahweh. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap what grows on itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your unrest vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land. The Sabbath of the land shall provide food for you, for yourself, and for your male and female slaves, and for your hired workers, and the sojourner who lives with you, and for your cattle, and for the wild animals that are in your land. All its yield shall be for food. You shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the time of the 7 weeks of years shall give you 49 years. Then you shall sound the loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall sound the trumpet throughout all your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of itself, nor gather the grapes from the unrest vines. For it is a jubilee, it shall be holy for you. You may eat the produce of the field. In this year of jubilee, each of you shall return to his property, and if you make a sale to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. You shall pay your neighbor according to the number of years after the jubilee, and he shall sell you according to the number of years for crops. If the years are many, you shall increase the price, and if the years are few, you shall reduce the price. For it is the number of the crops that he is selling to you. You shall not wrong one another, but you shall fear your God, for I am Yahweh your God. Therefore, you shall do my statutes and keep my rules and perform them, and then you will dwell in the land securely. The land will yield its fruits, and you will eat your fill and dwell in it securely. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, if we may not sow or gather in our crop? I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, so that it shall produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating some of the old crop. You shall eat the old until the 9th year, when its crop arrives. This is another important law pertaining to sowing and reaping, the significance of which is allowing a Sabbath rest for the land on the 7th year, in which there should be no more pruning of the land or sowing in the land. The obedience to which the people would see Yahweh's blessing of abundant crops sufficient enough for 3 years. Every 50th year is to be declared as the Jubilee, and the proclamation of this should be done on the Day of Atonement, which is the 10th day of the 7th month in biblical calendar. This would signal every Hebrew slave to be declared free and to return back to everyone's property. The next law is pertaining to the responsibility of an owner about his domesticated animal. If the ox he has goes a male or female servant, he shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. By giving all these laws, Yahweh warned the Israelites, cursed be he that confirms not all the words of this law to do them. And all the people shall say, Amen. Yahweh also warned the Israelites about false prophets. Deuteronomy 13. If there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder, And the sign or the wonder comes to pass, of which he spoke to you, saying, Let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For Yahweh your God is testing you to know whether you love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after Yahweh your God and fear him, and keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. But that prophet or the dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken in order to turn you away from Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to entice you from the way in which Yahweh your God commanded you to walk. So you shall put away the evil from your midst. So this concludes part 4 of the Messiah series. With this understanding of the law and covenant, in the next part we will see how Israel would fare in the promised land that Yahweh has given them.